On July 29, 2024, a quiet dance studio in Southport became the scene of a nightmare.
This is the most harrowing and large-scale investigation the force has ever dealt with.
It was supposed to be a day of joy and laughter, a day where little girls could dance, sing, and forget about the world outside. In just minutes, a peaceful yoga and dance class turned into chaos. 3 young girls lost their lives, and 10 others were left fighting for theirs.
I would also like to pay tribute to 3 little girls, Elsie, Phoebe, and Alice, whose beautiful faces and names will be etched on the minds of people across Merseyside and indeed the UK forever.
This is the story of Axel Rudakubana, a teenager whose dark obsessions led to one of the most shocking crimes in recent memory. But how did it come to this? And could it have been stopped? The Heart Space Dance Studio in Southport was a place of magic for kids. On that fateful day, 26 children, mostly little girls, had gathered for a Taylor Swift-themed yoga and dance class. They were making friendship bracelets, singing along to their favorite songs, and just being kids. The room was filled with laughter, glitter, and the kind of innocence that makes you believe the world is still a good place. But at 11:47 a.m., everything changed. A hooded figure walked into the studio, later identified as Axel Rudakubana. A 17-year-old boy was carrying a 20-centimeter kitchen knife. What happened next was pure horror. Rudakubana moved through the room like a shadow, stabbing at will. The children screamed. Some tried to run, but he chased them down. The studio, once filled with laughter, was now a scene of unimaginable terror. One survivor, a 7-year-old girl, later described how she tried to escape but was pulled back inside. She was stabbed multiple times before managing to stagger into the street, where she collapsed. Another child hid in a locked bathroom with her dance teacher, listening to the screams outside. When the police arrived, they found Rudakubana standing over the body of 6-year-old Bebe King, who had been stabbed to death. 7-year-old Elsie Stancombe and 9-year-old Alice Da Silva Aguiar were also killed. 8 other children and 2 adults were seriously injured. The aftermath was chaos. Parents rushed to the scene, desperate to find their children. The community was in shock. How could something like this happen here, in a quiet town like Southport? And who was Axel Rudakubana? At first glance, he seemed like an ordinary teenager, but as the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Rudakubana was anything but ordinary. He had a history of violence, a fascination with death, and a dark obsession with acts of mass murder. And yet, despite all the warning signs, no one stopped him. Rudakubana was arrested at the scene, but the question remained: what drove him to commit such a horrific act? And why were the warning signs ignored? To understand this story, we need to go back, way back, to where it all began. Axel Rudakubana didn't become a killer overnight. His path to violence was long, twisted, and filled with warning signs that were either ignored or misunderstood. To understand how a 17-year-old boy could commit such a horrific act, we need to go back to where it all began: his childhood. Axel Rudakubana grew up in Banks, a quiet village in Lancashire. As a child, he seemed unassuming, just another kid in the neighborhood. He even appeared in a BBC Children in Need campaign video when he was 11, smiling and full of life. But something changed when he turned 13. Classmates at Range High School in Formby remember him as a troubled teenager. He was bullied, and by his own admission, he felt isolated and angry. In October 2019, he made a chilling phone call to Childline. He confessed to carrying a knife to school multiple times and asked, "What should I do if I want to kill somebody?" It was a cry for help, but one that went unanswered. Rudakubana's behavior spiraled out of control. He was expelled from Range High School after bringing a knife to class. Months later, he returned to the school armed with a hockey stick and attacked another student, breaking their wrist. He was arrested and charged, but the system failed to address the root of his problems. He bounced between schools for children with special needs, but his attendance was sporadic. Teachers described him as fixated on violence. He researched mass shootings, Adolf Hitler, and even the Rwandan genocide, a topic that hit close to home as his parents were survivors of the conflict. Despite these red flags, he slipped through the cracks. Between 2019 and 2021, rudakubana was referred to Prevent, the UK's anti-extremism program, 3 times. Each time, concerns were raised about his violent tendencies. But because he didn't fit the profile of a traditional extremist, he was never escalated as a high-risk case. Police were called to his home multiple times. On one occasion, he was found on a bus with a knife, telling officers he wanted to stab someone so they would delete his TikTok account. Instead of arresting him, they took him home and told his parents to keep knives out of reach. By 2024, rudakubana was a ticking time bomb. He had stopped engaging with mental health services, spent hours online researching violence, and even attempted to make ricin, a deadly poison, in his bedroom. But no one saw the danger coming, or if they did, they didn't act fast enough. However, rudakubana's dark obsessions finally came to a head. What happened next would shock the world and leave a community forever scarred. July 29, 2024, started like any other summer day in Southport. The sun was shining and the Heart Space Dance Studio was buzzing with excitement. 26 children had gathered for a Taylor Swift-themed yoga and dance workshop. But by midday, the laughter would turn to screams and the studio would become a crime scene. The workshop was in full swing by 11 a.m. The children, mostly girls between the ages of 6 and 12, were making friendship bracelets and singing along to Taylor Swift songs. Dance teachers Leanne Lucas and Heidi Little were leading the class, creating a safe and joyful environment for the kids. Meanwhile, Axel Rudakubana was at home, preparing for what would become one of the most horrific attacks in recent UK history. He had purchased a 20-centimeter kitchen knife on Amazon just 2 weeks earlier. That morning, he deleted his IP address from his tablet, a sign that he was trying to cover his tracks. At 11:10 a.m., rudakubana left his house. He was wearing a hood and a surgical mask, his face obscured. He booked a taxi to take him to the Heart Space studio. The driver later recalled that rudakubana was eerily silent during the ride. When they arrived, rudakubana got out without paying and walked toward the studio. At 11:47 a.m., he entered the building. The children were sitting at tables, crafting bracelets and singing. Rudakubana moved quickly, pulling out his knife and stabbing at random. The room erupted into chaos. Children screamed and tried to flee, but rudakubana chased them down, stabbing them in the back as they ran. Within minutes, the studio was a scene of unimaginable horror. 6-year-old B.B. King and 7-year-old Elsie Stancombe were killed at the scene. 9-year-old Alice da Silva Aguiar managed to stagger outside, but collapsed and died the next day. 8 other children and 2 adults were seriously injured. Police arrived at 11:59 a.m. Bodycam footage showed officers rushing into the studio where they found rudakubana standing over baby's body, still holding the knife. He was tackled to the floor and arrested without resistance. The attack lasted just 12 minutes, but its impact would be felt for generations. Families were shattered, a community was left in shock, and a nation demanded answers. How could this have happened? And why wasn't rudakubana stopped before it was too late? The Southport stabbing sent shockwaves across the UK. As the community mourned, investigators began piecing together the events of that day. What they uncovered was a chilling portrait of a young man obsessed with violence, death, and destruction. Police quickly identified Axel Rudakubana as the perpetrator. He had been arrested at the scene, but the investigation was just beginning. Officers searched his home and made a horrifying discovery: a cache of weapons, including a machete, arrows, and a sealed container of ricin, a deadly poison. Rudakubana's online activity revealed a deep fascination with mass violence. He had researched school shootings, the Rwandan genocide, and even the stabbing of a bishop in Sydney earlier that year. Despite these red flags, no one had connected the dots before it was too late. Rudakubana's trial began on January 20th, 2025. He pleaded guilty to all 16 charges, including 3 counts of murder, 10 counts of attempted murder, and possession of a bladed article. The courtroom was packed with grieving families, many of whom had lost their children in the attack. Prosecutors described the attack as sadistic and pure evil. They played CCTV footage showing Rudakubana entering the studio and the chaos that followed. Survivors and family members gave emotional victim impact statements, describing the lifelong trauma caused by his actions. Rudakubana refused to appear in court for much of the trial, shouting demands for medical attention and disrupting proceedings. When he did speak, he showed no remorse, telling officers after his arrest that he was glad the children were dead.
Axel Rudakubana was heard to say, "It's a good thing those children are dead. I'm so glad, so happy." And it was at this point that he started shouting that he was ill, "I'm not going to remain quiet, I can't continue with this."
On January 23rd, 2025, Rudakubana was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 52 years.
Accordingly, in total, I sentenced Rudakubana to 13 sentences of custody for life and a minimum term to be served in custody of 51 days and 190 days. It is highly likely that he will never be released.
The judge also addressed the debate over whether the attack was an act of terrorism. While Rudakubana's actions didn't meet the legal definition of terrorism, the judge said the distinction misses the point. The level of violence and harm caused was equivalent to terrorism, regardless of motive. Rudakubana was behind bars, but the question remained, could this tragedy have been prevented? And what does his case mean for the future of counterterrorism and mental health intervention in the UK? In the days following the attack, Southport became a flashpoint for anger and grief. Misinformation about the perpetrator's identity spread online, leading to riots and clashes with police. A mosque was damaged and protests erupted across the country. The attack had exposed deep divisions and sparked a national conversation about violence, extremism, and mental health. Prime Minister Keir Starmer addressed the nation, calling the attack an atrocity and promising to overhaul terrorism laws. He appointed David Anderson to lead a review of the PREVENT program. The goal? To ensure that non-ideological acts of violence, like Rudakubana's, are identified and stopped before it's too late. As the dust settled, it became clear that Rudakubana's path to violence was marked by missed opportunities. He had been referred to PREVENT 3 times between 2019 and 2021, but each time he was deemed not to pose a significant threat. Police had been called to his home multiple times, yet no one intervened decisively. An independent review found that Rudakubana's case should have been escalated. PREVENT had focused too narrowly on ideological extremism, failing to recognize the danger posed by individuals like Rudakubana, whose violence was driven by obsession rather than ideology. The review called for a broader definition of extremism and better coordination between agencies. Amid the calls for reform, the victims of the Southport stabbings were not forgotten. Elsie Stancombe, B.B. King, and Alice da Silva Aguiar were remembered as bright, joyful children whose lives were cut tragically short. Their families spoke of the pain of losing their daughters and the lifelong impact of the attack. Leanne Lucas, the dance teacher who survived the attack, became a voice for the victims. In a powerful statement, she said, "He targeted us because we were women and girls, vulnerable and easy prey, but we are stronger than he ever imagined." The story of the Southport stabbings is one of tragedy, but also of resilience. It's a reminder that violence can strike anywhere, at any time, but it's also a call to action, to listen to the warning signs, to intervene before it's too late, and to honor the victims by building a safer, more compassionate world. Thank you for watching this difficult but important story. The Southport stabbings remind us of the fragility of life and the need to come together in the face of tragedy. If this video moved you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us tell stories that matter and spark conversations that can lead to change. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. And if you have thoughts or reflections on this story, leave a comment below. We read everyone.